Welcome to Watching Comics with me, Chris Otto, where I share my thoughts and opinions on comic book movies and television shows. And on this, the first episode of Watching Comics, thought it'd be appropriate to count down my top 5 favorite comic book movies of all time, giving an idea of my taste in comic book movies and what I expect from comic book movies. But before I do that, let's have a quick recap of what's happened this week in the world of comic book television. We start with Monday night's episode of Gotham entitled The Blind Fortune Teller. Fish Mooney has found herself in the plot of Michael Bay's film The Island. Turns out her and the prisoners are being held for their organs. And with Fish Mooney gone, the Penguin is running the club and doing a terrible job of it. Victor Zsasz shows up with a reformed Butch who's going to help him, though. So that should be fun. Barbara Gordon comes home to her apartment to find Selena Kyle and Ivy Pepper just kind of eating her food and decides they're all going to be BFFs now and asks for advice on what outfit to wear to win Jim Gordon back. And of course, when she goes to the precinct to do that, she finds Jim Gordon making out with his new girlfriend, Dr. Leslie Tompkins, after they had just solved the murder of the circus performer. It turned out to be Jerome in the field with the hatchet. Speaking of Jerome, basically the highlight of the episode, at least according to the promo the week before, because Jerome turned out to be the character that will eventually become the Joker. Before I say anything else, I just want to say I think the kid who played Jerome, Cameron Monaghan, did a fantastic job of nailing the mannerisms of the Joker. It really felt like that he was emulating Mark Hamill's Joker, which, let's face it, if you're going to try and emulate someone, that's probably the best Joker you could pick. You know, he does this thing where he starts off very sinister and then just laughs it off. You know, one of the things that I always loved about Mark Hamill's Joker is the way he would do that. Like, there's a line he has in Mask of the Phantasm where he starts off, you know, I'm not going to do an impression of it, but basically he says, you know, he gets mad, like, don't touch me. I don't know where you've been, and just starts laughing, you know, and I felt like that this kid Cameron was doing that with the character of Jerome, that he was just very much playing up that, you know, Joker thinks everything he says is funny, and I think that he did a good job of nailing that. However, I think the fact that that side of the Joker already exists is wrong. I think that side of the Joker shouldn't exist before Batman exists. You know, Joker's obsessed with Batman, and that's because Batman's the one who caused him to fall into the vat of chemicals that bleached his skin, made his hair green, and in most versions of the character, in the comic world at least, it's that moment that pushes him over the edge. Before the day that happens to him, Joker's a normal guy. That happens, and now he's the Joker, and he's obsessed with Batman. So for him to already have this crazy side to him takes away, in my opinion, a lot of what the Joker is about. And as for the young Bruce Wayne, he shows up for about 10 seconds to tell the board of directors at Wayne Enterprises that they're a bunch of corrupt idiots, and that even though he's only 12 years old, he'd probably do a better job than them. But since he's only 12 years old, he's not allowed to. And I really like that attitude that he has, because I think that's an important part of becoming Batman. You know, you really believe that this kid is going to grow up to be Batman, because that is the real Bruce Wayne. You know, Batman's the real Bruce Wayne. You know, the Bruce Wayne the public knows is an act. That's not who Bruce Wayne really is. Batman is who he really is. So it's cool to see that, you know, coming from him as a kid, because, you know, Bruce Wayne stopped being Bruce Wayne when his parents were murdered. You know, that was he became Batman in that moment. So I think it's cool that the show is doing that. They're really, when Bruce Wayne is in the show, really pushing that he's not a little kid, you know. Yes, physically he's only 12 years old, but he grew up fast, and I think that's an important part of the character. Next, we have Tuesday night's episode of Agent Carter entitled Snafu, where Edwin Jarvis and Peggy Carter reveal that they have been secretly working to clear Howard Stark's name. And while Peggy is talking to Chief Dooley, Agent Sousa, and Agent Thompson, they're all like, how are you investigating something without any of us noticing? And Peggy basically tells them, well, you're a bunch of sexist pigs that only notice me when I have your coffee. And she also is like, how come you're letting this Russian doctor walk around sending Morse code signals across the street? So Chief Dooley and the two agents talk, and Agents Sousa and Thompson say they trust Peggy. And Chief Dooley says he doesn't, but he trusts them. So you guys go see who this Russian doctor's been sending messages to, and I'll keep an eye on the Russian doctor, which doesn't work out for Chief Dooley because the Russian doctor hypnotizes him into helping him steal one of Stark's weapons from the SSR lab and then escape with the weapon. While this is going on, Agents Thompson and Sousa are across the street with a team looking for Dottie, who is the one the Russian doctor was sending the messages to. Sousa finds her, and dude's got one leg. He gets beat up by her, and she beats up a bunch of other guys on the team too. I think kills one of them and escapes with the Russian doctor with the weapon. So Thompson and the rest of the team that's still alive returns to the SSR office, while Sousa sticks around and finds the dentist office that Dottie's been hiding out in, finds evidence pretty much proving what Peggy's been saying. Back in the SSR office, everyone finds Chief Dooley in his office, who is hypnotized into putting on one of Stark's inventions that was meant to keep you warm when you're invading cold places like Russia. Since it's a prototype, is more of a bomb vest, and Jarvis pretty much says, "Yeah, if you mess with that, it's gonna blow up, and it's very unstable and it's gonna blow up on its own anyway." So Chief Dooley decides to sacrifice himself, jumps out the window just as the vest is about to explode, and he blows up over the streets of New York, which was a shame, mostly because Shea Wiggum, who plays Chief Dooley, I love him. It's a shame that Boardwalk Empire is over because I miss seeing him on my TV every week, and I was hoping to see, if there's more Agent Carter in the future, I was hoping to see more of him. So it's a shame that he won't be on the show anymore if it continues. After Chief Dooley's noble sacrifice, the episode ends with Dottie and the Russian doctor releasing the weapon that they stole, a chemical or gas or something that kills a movie theater full of people. Tuesday night is also when the Flash episode entitled Fallout aired. Episode mostly dealt with Ronnie Raymond and Professor Stein, who managed to be separated after the nuclear blast that happened at the end of last week's episode. They're brought back to Star Labs, some tests are done, and then they're allowed to go on their merry way. But then Ronnie Raymond and Professor Stein start, exhibiting some strange behavior, and it turns out that they are actually still connected after spending over a year together. Their brainwaves are still connected. They can still feel what each other feels. So when Professor Stein is knocked out and brought to a military base, Ronnie Raymond can feel it. They go to Star Labs, and the Flash decides that he and Ronnie Raymond are going to go save Professor Stein. They do that. Professor Stein and Ronnie Raymond, they were told by Harrison Wells, part of their problem while they were stuck together was that they didn't want to be stuck together. So if they just accept it, they might be able to do some pretty cool stuff. So that's what they decide to do at the military base. They're like, all right, let's go for this. They join together, do their firestorm thing, setting people on fire, some pretty cool stuff, and then return back to Star Labs and decide, what, let's try and separate. Since we accepted going together, let's accept being separated. They separate, have discovered this new ability they have, and while they were very much looking forward to leading normal lives once again, they decide they should go to Pittsburgh or something to study themselves with one of Professor Stein's old colleagues, discover, how did this happen how did this work, and discover more about the Firestorm Matrix. After all of that, the episode ends with General Eiling, who was the this week's villain, is kidnapped by Reverse Flash and brought to a sewer we've seen before in a previous episode where the word Grodd is scratched into the walls. And so General Eiling is like, who's this idiot in yellow spandex that just brought me here? Of course, as everyone knows, it was Harrison Wells. He takes off his mask and talks to General Eiling and says, oh, an old friend of ours is here. And it turns out to be the telepathic Flash villain, Gorilla Grodd, who seemed to kill General Eiling. Unfortunately, we have to wait a whole month for the next episode of The Flash. But apparently this is a big episode because it will be the episode where Harrison Wells finally reveals that he is in fact a total dick. Thursday night's episode of Arrow, entitled The Return, was about Oliver and Thea, present-day Oliver and Thea, returning to the island Oliver spent some time on, and flashback Oliver returning to Starling City. Flashback Oliver basically lives out It's a Wonderful Life, gets to see how miserable his friends and family are with him dead. Thea turns to drugs. We see how, Detective Lance turned into a raging alcoholic. Laurel Lance wasn't, doing too great either. But we do see her and Tommy Merlin get together. We also get to see John Diggle with his brother Andy, who are the bodyguards of some of the guests at a party Tommy Merlin is throwing that Oliver decides to go to. The Japanese guy he's been working with, Masao, is all like, we need to GTFO. So they leave, but Ollie is like, nah, I'm staying, goes back to his house, which apparently no one ever walks around in, so he can just walk in and sit in the living room and look at the computer and watch a video from his father where his dad is like, I have failed this city. So Ollie is like, all right, I guess I'll go back and do my Argus thing as much as I hate it, and helps Masao with the mission that Ollie was supposed to be there on. As for present day, Ollie and Thea, they go back to the island, and Ollie decides to visit everyone's favorite prisoner on the island, Slade Wilson, and finds that he has escaped and gets a call from Malcolm Merlin, who reveals that, yeah, I let him go because I sent you there to train, but your training is actually to not die at the hands of Slade Wilson. Of course, Slade finds them, beats them up, traps them in the prison cell, which they escape by dislocating Thea's arm. Fun stuff. Then when they find Slade, Slade finds them actually, holds a gun to Thea. Thea's all like, nah. And after all the training Malcolm Merlin has given her, she takes the gun away, points it at him, and Ollie is like, nah, don't kill him. She's like, but I'm a killer, because Ollie had told her that she was, in fact, the one who killed Sarah under the mind control of Malcolm. Ultimately, Thea decides to just shoot Slade in the arm. They put him back in the prison, come back to Starling City. Thea gets all mad at Malcolm. And, it's pretty much, a normal Arrow episode. Several characters decide they are no longer talking to other characters. It wouldn't be an episode of Arrow if someone didn't swear they were never talking to another character ever again. And finally, I want to talk about the least talked about comic book television show, Constantine. The season finale was last Friday. I enjoyed the episode. I thought it was a good episode, but it was not a very good season finale. It seemed that the creators were either unaware or were just in denial that the episode was going to be their season finale. So it didn't have any real season finale feel to it, except for the fact that Manny the Angel, played by Harold Perrineau, revealed himself to be the bad guy. And, that's a real original idea, that the angel who is helping Constantine turned out to be the bad guy. That's real original. Like I said, it was a good episode. I liked that we got to see Jim Corrigan and Papa Midnight again. Other than that, like I said, not the best season finale for a show, but since it was the season finale, the season as a whole, I thought it was a good show. It got confusing at first because, it's like, oh, this is the female lead in the pilot, but yeah, we're not going to use her. So we're going to change the ending and she leaves and we're going to introduce a different female lead. So it got a little confusing at first, especially since the original female lead was a character whose father was a character that Constantine had a history with. So it was weird. It made more sense for her to be there and then they just got rid of her for whatever reason. But yeah, I mean, the new female lead, Zed, played by Angelica Salea, I think that's probably not how you pronounce her last name at all, but whatever. She was a great character. Plus, she's quite lovely, so that makes it easy to watch her on screen. I also enjoyed the guy who played Chaz. I also thought Matt Ryan did a good job of capturing how much of a selfish asshole Constantine is. I hope the show gets picked up for a second season. If not, oh well. I enjoyed it, but we'll see what the future holds for John Constantine. Now, before I get to the topic of this first episode of Watching Comics, I want to talk about the biggest news that happened this week in the world of comic book movies, and that is, of course, Zack Snyder tweeted a picture of Jason Momoa in his costume as Aquaman, and the dude looks like a total badass in his Aquaman costume, and superimposed over the picture are the words "Unite the Seven." I think it's fair to assume that the Seven refers to the seven members of the Justice League, although only 6 members have been cast. But like I said, I think Jason Momoa looks awesome as Aquaman. And I've never been a big fan of Aquaman. I've always been one of those people that had that attitude of he talks to fish. He's probably the least useful member of the Justice League. That was, of course, before I started reading about the character. But yeah, I think Jason Momoa looks. I think it's gonna be a really cool take on the character. And of course, people are complaining. The first complaint that's obviously been around since Jason Momoa was announced as Aquaman is that, well, in the comics, Aquaman is a blonde-haired white guy, and Jason Momoa is clearly not blonde or white. Another thing that I saw someone say is that they think Jason Momoa isn't buff enough to be Aquaman, and it's like, what? Like, are you expecting him to look like a bodybuilder? Like, the dude is already huge. It seems like he's always huge. When he was Khal Drogo, he was huge and intimidating. He was in Conan the Barbarian. He was nice and intimidating in that. So I think people are just people just look for any reason to complain. Like I said, I think the picture looks awesome, and I can't wait to see what they do with this character. And now for the topic of this first episode of Watching Comics, a countdown of my top 5 favorite comic book films. Like I said, I thought this would be a good starting point for the podcast, give you an idea of my taste in comic book films and what I expect from comic book films. We begin the countdown with number 5, Batman Begins, released in 2005. Those of you who know me, and those of you who don't know me will soon find out, I love Batman. Batman is easily my all-time favorite comic book character, so I knew doing a countdown of my top 5 favorite films, I had to include a Batman film. Problem being that being such a fan of Batman, I'm very critical of Batman films, and so the film that I found the least amount of things wrong with in terms of live-action films was Batman Begins. Batman Begins was actually the first comic book film I ever saw where I was familiar with the source material. It was a lot of fun to be sitting in the theater and recognizing the device in his boot that attracts the bats, and the card that Jim Gordon gives him at the end, the Joker card, being from Batman Year One. That was a lot of fun for me. Another thing that pretty much everyone loved about Batman Begins was how serious and based in a real world it was. It took the character of Batman very seriously, which was really the first time we've seen a live action movie take Batman that seriously. Tim Burton tried. Batman 89 is a great film. Batman Returns, he was allowed to be a little more himself in making the film. Unfortunately, Batman's only in it for like 10 minutes. So it was nice to get a serious, well done Batman film, especially compared to the last time we saw Batman on the big screen, Batman and Robin, which was basically just to sell action figures. Another thing that I also like about Batman Begins is that it treats the characters of Bruce Wayne and Batman as two separate characters, which I think is very important to the world of Batman because Bruce Wayne is Batman. Bruce Wayne is who he pretends to be. Batman's who he really is. Bruce Wayne is the act. Rachel Dawes even says as much right at the end of Batman Begins. And I really liked that the Dark Knight trilogy as a whole really focused on that, but especially in Batman Begins because he's struggling with, he just wants to be Batman. He doesn't want to have to put up with the things he has to do as Bruce Wayne. The only thing Bruce Wayne is good for is his money. That's the only thing Batman likes about being Bruce Wayne. Otherwise, he'd rather just be Batman all the time, solving crimes, crushing skulls, all those Batman things. There are things that I find irritating about the film, namely the incorrect pronunciation of Ra's al Ghul. It's not the worst thing in the world, but every time, the first time someone says Roz in the film, it catches my attention. I'm like, oh, I forgot that they did that. Another thing that also can be disappointing is the way that the Scarecrow was treated. I felt like most of the film kind of built him up to being a bigger part of what was going to happen. This guy who basically makes it so that Ra's al Ghul and the League of Shadows can conduct their plan. His last scene is him getting tased in the face by Rachel Dawes, which I think is a terrible way for the character's last scene in the film. Because at the time, we didn't know he was going to show up again in all the sequels. I think I almost would have rather not seeing him ever again after the last time we see him earlier when Jim Gordon sees him. I almost would have preferred that being the last time we see him. And then one of the things I find humorous in the film is that there's I believe it's Joffrey Baratheon is asking the cop where his mom is, and the cop is obviously actually one of the members of the League of Shadows and tells the kid to, buzz off or whatever. Rachel Dawes is like, hey, don't talk to the kid like that. And the guy just points at her face. I've always gotten a real kick out of that. The way he just points at her. Doesn't say anything. Just points at her. And then Ra's al Ghul comes up and is like, oh, time to spread the word, and the word is fear. Another thing I also enjoy about the film is that we see Batman screw up a lot, which is one of the nice things about a Batman origin story, and probably one of the few origin stories I really enjoy, because origin stories can sometimes seem tedious to me. It's like, oh, it's a 2-hour film and an hour and a half is spent, introducing why he becomes this character. And I prefer just, if it's a 2-hour film, I want to see 2 hours of the hero. But the thing is, once Batman knows what he's doing, he doesn't screw up. You never see Batman mess up. And when he does mess up, he doesn't admit it and remains very calm. So to see him, when he breaks into Jim Gordon's office and then he runs out and he's trying to, escape down the fire escape and falls down trying to jump across the alleyways, and then later on when Scarecrow sets him on fire and, hits him with the fear toxin and he falls into the streets of the Narrows on fire and has to call Alfred for help. It's nice to see Batman vulnerable in that way, because then it makes you appreciate even more later on when Batman is just unstoppable and prepared for absolutely anything. Moving on to number 4, The Wolverine, released in 2013. This is a film that renewed my interest in Wolverine. Up until this point, I was still very much only reading DC comics. So when the trailer came out, I was like, you know what? Let me start to learn a little bit more about Wolverine. So before the movie even came out, I was already looking more into what was going on in the world of Wolverine. Then the film came out, and I absolutely loved it. And I think one of the things that I really enjoy about the film is that it's not jam packed with mutants. I think that's been the downfall of a number of the X-Men films, especially the first time they tried to focus on Wolverine, X-Men Origins, where it was they just tried to jam in as many mutants as they could. That's a large portion of why that film failed, in my opinion at least. So in the Wolverine, you've got 6 mutants. You've got Wolverine, you've got Yukio, Viper. So those are the 3 mutants that the film is mostly about. Then you have Jean Grey showing up in Logan's dreams. And then in the post-credit sequence, you have Charles Xavier and Magneto show up. Those are the only mutants in the entire film. And I think, the focus on just Wolverine really helped the film. What also helps my opinion of the film is that even though I tried to familiarize myself with the character of Wolverine and what the character of Wolverine was up to in comics at that time, I wasn't as knowledgeable about Wolverine's past in the comics. So I never read the specific storyline that this film is based on, because I know a lot of people were disappointed in the portrayal of the Silver Samurai. Now, for me, I'm not as familiar with the character or the entire storyline, so it was very easy for me to not be disappointed. It was just an enjoyable movie. One thing I also like is that it is Fox that's in control of Wolverine and the X-Men films. I feel like the way Hugh Jackman plays Wolverine couldn't exist in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because Fox is willing to let Logan tell people to go fuck themselves. Fox isn't afraid of that, whereas Marvel, I think, is aware kids are seeing these movies. They know kids are dressing up as Iron Man and Captain America and Thor. Kids love those characters. Even though kids love the X-Men, I think Fox is a little more willing to say, you know what, even though it's kids that like the characters, it's adults that are going to see these films. So let's just make it an adult film, especially with a character like Wolverine, who, for the most part will kill indiscriminately. So, it's a character that I feel like works best not in the Marvel universe. As much as it would be nice to see Wolverine get to show up with the Avengers, I'd be afraid that there would be a certain amount of sanitizing to that character if Hugh Jackman were to try to play the Wolverine he's been playing in a Marvel film. Moving on to number 3, The Avengers, released in 2012. It's really hard for me to put my finger on what exactly makes The Avengers one of my favorite films. How it happened was I would find myself bored, wanting to watch a movie, and one of the 2 Blu-rays I always immediately reached for when I wanted to watch a movie was The Avengers. Just every time it's like, oh, I'm bored, let me watch The Avengers. And this happened maybe 5 or 6 times, and I was like, you know what, I think this just might be one of my favorite films. And I think it's probably just because it's a fun film. It's coming to life. It's the first time we're seeing these characters together on screen, so that's a lot of fun. And I think that's why I watch it as often as I do. Another thing I absolutely love about the film is the on-screen chemistry that Robert Downey Jr. and Mark Ruffalo have. I think the scenes between Tony Stark and Dr. Banner are phenomenal. I was so disappointed when I saw Iron Man 3 and Mark Ruffalo was just a cameo right at the end. I so wanted just one good scene at some point in the film, between Tony Stark and Dr. Banner. And I remember sitting there during the credits being, looking to my friend and be like, man, I really wanted to see Dr. Banner. And then up comes the scene right at the end. So it was nice to see him, but I would have liked more because, like I said, those scenes that they have together are among my favorite scenes in the whole film. As great as Mark Ruffalo is as an actor, I think a lot of that is also on Robert Downey Jr. because when I think about other films Robert Downey Jr. has been in, it seems like he has chemistry with everyone he works with. Because in the same scenes when he's talking to Captain America, and then when Thor and Black Widow and Nick Fury are in there, he has this chemistry with all these actors. Even when Robert Downey Jr. is playing Sherlock Holmes, the chemistry he has with Jude Law is phenomenal. Going back to this film, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, directed by Shane Black, who directed and I think also wrote Iron Man 3. Robert Downey Jr. again, phenomenal chemistry with Val Kilmer, his co-star in that film. I guess it's fair to say one of my favorite parts of The Avengers is basically just Robert Downey Jr. However, there are some things that I don't quite understand in The Avengers. At the end, Tony Stark hijacks the nuke to direct it into the portal. So he goes through the portal and throws the nuke at the space station that the Chitauri came from. And when the nuke destroys the space station, all the Chitauri instantly die. And I've never understood why. Because the Chitauri aren't robots. In Star Wars Episode 1, Anakin destroys the space station, and it's the space station controlled the battle droids. So when the space station was destroyed, the battle droids stopped working because, their control center was destroyed. That made sense. They were robots. The Chitauri are living beings. That would be like destroying the Pentagon, and instantly every member of the United States Armed Forces drops dead. That makes no sense. If anyone has insight on why that happened, let me know. Twitter, @watching_comics, facebook.com/watchingcomicsny. It's possible Joss Whedon discussed this in the director commentary of the film. I haven't listened to the commentary. I tried one time, and it was incredibly boring. So if he addresses the issue there, like I said, I wouldn't know. Another thing about this scene that bothers me is that right up until this scene, the focus is on closing the portal because Chitauri keep coming through. So Tony goes in, destroys the space station. The Chitauri are all dead. The threat is gone, but they're still like, oh, we need to close the portal. And it's like, well, why not just wait for Tony? The threat is gone. You can just leave the portal open enough for Tony to come back. No, we got to close the portal. And I don't why is closing the portal such an important, thing now? Threat's done. You can wait for Tony to come back. And they insist on closing the portal. Luckily, Tony falls through anyway. Like I said, I don't understand why the Chitauri died and why they couldn't just wait for Tony to come back. They could have waited 2 seconds longer. And instead, they're like, nope. Gotta close the portal. Can't leave it open. More dead Chitauri might fall through. I don't get it. But besides that, I think The Avengers is it's a lot of fun. Moving right along, we come to number 2 in my top 5, Man of Steel, released in 2013. Until Man of Steel came out, I had absolutely no interest in Superman. I thought Superman was a boring character. He was overpowered. Like I said, my favorite character is Batman. And one of the things that I love about Batman is that he's a normal guy. He's a normal human being who just puts on a bat suit to take down criminals. And the thing is, when Batman puts on that suit and goes out, he's risking his life. Whether he's going up against Bane or just some mugger with a gun, he's putting his life on the line. Superman, on the other hand, is risking nothing most of the time. Armed robbery at a bank, Superman can just go in, walk up to the guy, no matter how powerful of a weapon the dude has, turn the gun into a pretzel, and drag the guy out of the bank. And so that's something I didn't like about Superman. I felt like he was never risking anything. He was just this god. I went to see Superman Returns, not because I wanted to see Superman, but because I wanted to see Kevin Spacey as Lex Luthor. I actually cheered in the theater when Lex stabs Superman with like a kryptonite shank. That was the reason why I saw Superman Returns. So Man of Steel comes out. I knew that General Zod was the bad guy, and I was kind of like, ugh, General Zod again. I wanted to see Superman beat someone up. I wanted to see Metallo or Doomsday or someone that Superman could really, punch right in the face. It actually turned out to be a billion times better than I thought a Superman movie could ever be. I was absolutely blown away. I thought it was an excellent film. It made me pick up a Superman comic. Shortly after I, acknowledged the fact that Man of Steel was an excellent film, a new creative team took over Action Comics, which stars Superman, and I picked it up and almost immediately wanted nothing to do with Superman again. I thought the storyline that they started in Action Comics was absolutely terrible. But another Superman comic came out, Superman Unchained. I read that, loved it, sort of. There was one thing that annoyed me in the first issue. The second page had to be folded out like a poster. And I'm like, this is why no one likes Superman, because they do stupid shit like this in a Superman book. Just want to read a comic. Oh no, I need to unfold this to look at it as a poster because I want to make the explosion of Superman flying through like a satellite or something take up, the size of a poster. I stuck with it though. The writing was good. A new creative team took over the Superman book. I read that, and since then I have a newfound interest in Superman. And so I'm really looking forward to this Man of Steel sequel, Dawn of Justice. Obviously, being a Batman fan, I'm really looking forward to seeing Ben Affleck take on that role. But I said Man of Steel, it made me like Superman because it humanized him. Even though he is like obnoxiously overpowered in the film, his personality is very vulnerable. And I feel like that went a long way, especially considering he was going up against General Zod, who now is just as powerful as Superman was, because Superman, it took his whole life on Earth to get the powers that he has because he wasn't trained. Whereas Zod says he was trained to be a warrior. So when he has these powers, he knows how to use them, which is another thing I never really liked about Superman, because if it wasn't for his powers, he's useless. He can't fight. He has no training as a fighter or a warrior. He's not a tactical thinker, so he can't be used in planning an attack. His plan of attack is punch it or use heat vision or breathe on it to make it cold. Even though I do like Superman now, he's clearly walking on thin ice, If a Superman comic I'm reading does something really dumb, I might not like Superman anymore. So he better watch his step, otherwise he'll very quickly not make it into my top 5. Before I reveal number 1 in this countdown of my top 5 favorite comic book films, I want to take an opportunity to acknowledge some honorable mentions, a couple of films that didn't quite make the cut for my top 5. The first is The Punisher, released in 2004. Punisher is quite easily my favorite Marvel character. Unfortunately, there are some things about the film that don't quite work, especially setting it in Tampa Bay instead of New York City. So there's things about it that keep it from quite making my top 5 of favorite films, comic book films. But The Punisher is a character I enjoy. It is a good film, especially the extended cut on the DVD that shows Frank Castle's time in the Middle East and has a whole subplot involving one of his friends who ultimately betrays him. He's blackmailed into betraying Frank Castle, revealing his location so that Howard Saint can have him and his family killed. In the subplot, Frank Castle finds this out and ultimately forces his friend to commit suicide. The other film that I think also deserves an honorable mention is Watchmen, released in 2009. I thought it did an extremely good job of capturing what the comic is about. Again, I couldn't find room for it in my top 5. Also, I can't have Zack Snyder dominating my top 5. I needed to mix it up a little bit. But like I said, I thought Watchmen was great. I thought it did a good job at adapting the source material. Watchmen also started this idea I have now where I'm just not going to bother questioning Zack Snyder's choices when it comes to casting, because I know before that film came out, everyone, including myself, had doubts about the people cast in the film. And in all honesty, everyone gave amazing performances except for Malin Ackerman. And I don't know if it's that she gave a bad performance or if it's just that she gave like a okay performance and is surrounded by great performances, which just makes her look worse. Because she has some lines that she delivered very awkwardly, but otherwise I think it's an excellent film and an excellent adaptation. And finally, we reach number 1. My all-time favorite comic book film is Sin City, released in 2005. This is the comic book film that got me to start reading comics. The trailer came out. I'm looking into the film because the subject matter interested me and the visual style of the film caught my attention. So I'm looking into the film. It's based on a graphic novel. And I'm like, the hell's a graphic novel? I look it up. It's a comic book. It's a long comic book. But then I see the trailer. I see the subject matter. And I'm like, wait a second. You're telling me that there are comic books about this sort of stuff? Because at the time, I very much lived under the assumption that most people do, that comics are for kids. They're all these multicolored superheroes, and the vast majority of comic books are for kids. So I see the movie, and it has all the things I love. It has guns and women and the cars, and it's like watching a film noir, which at the time was a genre I was a huge fan of. So to see that type of subject matter and know that there are comics that deal with this subject matter, it was like a new concept for me. So I went out after I saw the movie and read the comics. I couldn't believe how faithful the film was to the comics. You can't even call it an adaptation because it's exactly what the comic book is. It's a translation. You might as well be just watching the comic book move in front of you, which I don't think a comic book movie will ever do ever again. I love the film. I love it so much. I think I wrote 2 separate essays or research papers about it while I was in college. I was taking a film history class and we had a project where you had to pitch the idea why one of your favorite films should be considered a classic. And a lot of people kind of took like an easy way out and took films that were already considered classics and were like, yeah, Pulp Fiction's a classic because it's already a classic. It's like, well, what the hell? I took a film that at the time was relatively new and wasn't really considered a classic yet, but in my opinion, it is. Sin City isn't just my favorite comic book film. It's one of my all-time favorite films ever. I listed amongst, Pulp Fiction, The Departed, and Godfather Part 2 as my all-time favorite films because it deals with subject matter that I enjoy. And like I said, when I realized that there were comics like that, I read them. The stories that the movie were based on, I read those stories. Big Fat Kill, Hard Goodbye, and That Yellow Bastard. So I read those, and one day I'm in school, and I see a kid reading a Sin City book. So I start talking to him. I'm like, immediately I know I have something in common with this kid. I'm like, oh, you read Sin City? I love the movie. I just started reading the books. And he was reading A Dame to Kill For. And he was like, yeah, you got to read the other Sin City books. They're so good. And I'm like, oh, yeah, totally. He's like, if you liked Sin City, you should check out Frank Miller's other work. Frank Miller wrote a bunch of Batman. And I'm like, Frank Miller wrote Batman? Because at the time, even though I didn't read comics, I still loved Batman. So, he told me Frank Miller wrote Batman. So I immediately went out, and I think I either read Year One or Dark Knight Returns first. I forget which, but either way, I read a Frank Miller Batman book, and I was like, I never knew that comics could be written like this. If it weren't for Sin City, I can't say that I would have never gotten into comics, but I can definitely say I wouldn't have gotten into comics then. And I wouldn't have the same taste in comics as I do now if it weren't for Sin City. So to recap, my top 5 favorite comic book films are: number 5, Batman Begins; number 4, The Wolverine; number 3, The Avengers; number 2, Man of Steel. Honorable mentions go to The Punisher and Watchmen, and number 1 is Sin City. Think my top 5 sucks? Let me know. Twitter @watching_comics or facebook.com/watchingcomicsny. Let me know what your top 5 is and why your favorite comic book movies are better than my favorites. That just about does it here on the very first episode of Watching Comics. I'm Chris Otto, and we'll see you next time.